The photo of the stage was still sitting on my desk, propped up against a half-empty coffee mug, me standing under the bright white lights, holding the award that marked the turning point of everything I'd ever worked for. The night my company crossed its first major milestone, a valuation that pushed us from hopeful startup into a name investors whispered with reverence. The kind of night people dream about, sweat for, bleed for. And my family never showed. Not a text, not a call, not a face in the audience while I scanned the crowd with the certainty that they were just late. I had stood there that night waiting for them to appear, telling myself they would. Telling myself they cared enough about me to at least pretend. But the room emptied, reporters packed up, and I walked out alone, carrying the weight of realization heavier than the award in my hands. By the next morning, the headlines hit. Black Ark valued at $28 million after Series B round. Suddenly, I existed. Suddenly, I mattered. The sun had gone down now, and the city spread beneath my office windows. Glass, steel, neon, everything I built by refusing to be small. I was still at my desk when my phone buzzed against the table, the vibration sharp, insistent, like a knock on a door I never wanted opened again. Dad. Family dinner at 7 p.m. Important discussion, no punctuation, no congratulations, no acknowledgement of the announcement that had half the tech world posting about Black Ark's meteoric rise. Just a summons, cold and clipped. I stared at the message for a long moment, letting every piece of history pulse through my mind. The forgotten birthdays, the missed recitals, the repeated lesson that achievement meant nothing unless it served them. For a second, an old version of me flickered. Hopeful, stupid, still believing that maybe this time would be different. But the feeling didn't stay. It evaporated, replaced by something quieter, darker. Not hope, not fear. Something colder. The truth was obvious. This wasn't a reunion, it was an extraction. They didn't want to celebrate me. They wanted to calculate me, assess what they could access, absorb, or leverage now that the world had stamped a price tag on my work. And my gut, the instinct that had carried me through a decade of cutthroat entrepreneurship, whispered the thing I didn't want to admit. This wasn't about family. It was about opportunity. I knew this wasn't about congratulations. It was about what they could take. They had always seen something else in me. Something smaller. Something temporary. My family had a way of shrinking things that mattered to me, pressing them down until they fit inside the limits of their own imagination. They didn't see ambition, strategy, or grit when I talked about my company. They saw a phase, a distraction, a childish detour from what they called a real life. My father, Gregory, had always been the loudest voice in that chorus. To him, business meant buildings, deeds, and concrete. Anything you could slam a fist against. He believed wealth came only from square footage, not software. Real men build things you can walk into, he told me once, sipping his scotch, dismissing my work without actually learning anything about it. If I ever brought up traction, user base, or revenue, he waved it off and said, "Digital toys. No future in that." My mother, Helena, didn't argue with him. She didn't have to. Her version of dismissal was softer, but somehow sharper. To her, my company was just a stage I would outgrow, the same way kids abandon hobbies when they get bored. She'd smile, pat my cheek like I was 5 and say, "Sweetheart, it's lovely you're experimenting. But one day you'll want something stable." She spoke as if stability was waiting for me, like I could just walk into a marriage, or a family business, or some pre-packaged life and settle quietly into it. She liked to imagine that, eventually, I would stop chasing what she considered noise. My older brother, Marcus, played a different role, the expert who earned nothing but advised everyone. He quoted business books he never finished, lectured me about market realities, and used phrases like strategic patience without having built a single thing in his life. He believed his gender, age, and a LinkedIn bio made him a mentor by default, and whenever I shared progress, he'd nod with a condescending smile and say, "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Then there was Dylan, the youngest, the influencer, the one who thought the world owed him virality simply because he existed. He waited for the universe to reward him the way my mother rewarded him, without effort. He'd shrug at my work and say, "Can't relate, I don't do office stuff," as if a meeting calendar was a personal failure. The truth was they had never seen me. Not really. Flashbacks came unbidden sometimes, like driving across town at 21, waiting for a good luck call that never came. Sitting in my car at 2 a.m., laptop open, sleep-deprived and sore because rent was due and I couldn't afford both an apartment and a co-working space. Later, sleeping in that same car with clothing piled over me, telling myself freezing fingers would type faster tomorrow, I remembered my father saying, "Struggle builds character," like it was a financial plan. I remembered my mother saying, "Everyone needs to learn humility," as if humiliation was a rite of passage. What they never saw were the years of brutal, boring grind. The nights I passed out with keyboard imprints on my cheek, the borrowed desk space in a stranger's living room, the embarrassingly small wins that kept me moving, 1 inch at a time. They didn't witness the moments when success was just survival. They didn't see the version of me who kept building even when nothing worked. Because to them, my dream wasn't a business. It was a phase they were too polite to mention. Ever had family treat your dreams like a hobby they were too polite to mention? Tonight I wasn't walking in hoping to be seen. I was walking in knowing exactly what they were. I closed my laptop with a quiet click, the soft hum of the city fading into a thin, distant buzz behind the windows. For a moment I just sat there, staring at the black screen, letting the silence settle. I didn't feel nerves or anticipation, just a slow, controlled steadiness. The kind I'd learned to build over years of walking into rooms where I was underestimated. I grabbed a simple jacket off the back of my chair. Not the tailored coat I usually wore, not the designer piece that made board members take me seriously. Just a basic, unbranded layer with worn elbows and threads starting to fray in the garage. The contrast between lives waited for me. The glossed, meticulously detailed luxury SUV on one side, sleek, intimidating, unmistakable, and the old sedan on the other, its paint dulled by weather and years, steering wheel worn smooth from my palms. My luxury SUV stayed parked. Tonight, I needed them comfortable enough to show their hand. I chose the sedan not because I wanted to hide, because I wanted them to reveal themselves. People get sloppy when they think they're superior. Predictable people make mistakes. And my family was nothing if not predictable. The engine coughed before settling, a tired sound I remembered from nights I prayed it wouldn't die on me. As I drove, the city lights gave way to long stretches of highway and dark trees crowding the edges. Memories surfaced unprovoked. Missed graduations, half-hearted holidays, rushed gifts given out of obligation. Moments where I learned to shrink myself to fit into conversations that had no room for who I was becoming. I used to think the shrinking was survival. Now I realized it was training. The country club sat on a hill, lit up like it wanted everyone to know how expensive it was. White columns, manicured hedges, spotlights cast upward. Not welcoming but showcasing. Money with something to prove. I parked in the back, not out of habit but strategy. The engine clicked as it cooled, the sound sharp in the quiet night. I stepped out, placed my hand on the roof of the car, grounding myself. Not because I was nervous, but because I refused to let old ghosts dictate my posture. Inside, marble floors stretched beneath me, polished to a shine that reflected every step. The place smelled like citrus polish and old money. Clean, curated, performative. A place built to make people feel small unless they paid for the privilege of standing tall. But tonight, I wasn't here to shrink. I wasn't here to impress, I was here to watch them perform. And wait for them to slip. The dining room looked like a stage set for a reunion. Linen napkins folded into swans, candles burning with curated warmth, plates already positioned to signal wealth without saying it out loud. And in the center of it all, my father stood with his arms spread just a little too wide, like a politician greeting voters instead of a daughter. "Rose, finally," he said, and the word finally landed like blame rather than welcome. My mother followed, gliding in with that smile that had fooled strangers for decades. "You look tired," she said in a voice drenched in concern. "Are you eating enough?" A question meant to sound maternal but loaded with judgment. If I said yes, I was irresponsible. If I said no, I was unstable. Either way, she'd win. Marcus leaned back in his chair, wine glass raised like a prop in a commercial he wasn't qualified to star in. He smirked instead of smiling, like he knew something I didn't, which, given history, was unlikely. Dylan barely looked up, phone in hand, thumbs moving, probably updating his followers about some fictional grind he'd claim as fact later. They'd arranged the seating carefully like everything else. I wasn't next to anyone. I was one chair away, creating just enough space to make me feel like a guest rather than family. A subtle reminder. You are here but not close. The small talk came first, the slow torture disguised as conversation. How's your little company? My father asked, chewing like he couldn't be bothered to look up. Busy schedule, I'm sure, my mother added, the corners of her mouth tightening. Little company. Busy schedule. Soft knives, all of them, I answered minimally, feeding them neutral words. Not ammunition. Marcus swirled his wine, leaning forward with a twinkle of condescension. So, he said, voice low and performative, your name made the news today. There it was. Pivot. The reason I'd been summoned. My father's fork paused midair, and though he smiled, his tone dropped, flat, clipped, controlled. Exciting, he said, except it sounded eerily close to inconvenient. My mother's eyes flicked toward him, followed by the quiet glance between them. The silent language of co-conspirators evaluating an asset. Victor, my father's longtime attorney and permanent dinner guest when there was something at stake, cleared his throat deliberately. The sound sliced through the pretense like a closing argument. I felt it then. The tightening under my ribs, the instinctual warning that always preceded danger. Not physical danger but psychological. The kind I'd grown up swimming in. They weren't celebrating me. They were preparing to transition from affection to acquisition. Father leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers tented with the confidence of someone who expected obedience. We wanted to discuss something important, he said, and every syllable carried the weight of property lines and signatures. Not family, no congratulations. No pride. Not even curiosity. Just business. The kind of business where my accomplishments were valuable only if they could be transferred, shared, or exploited. And yet, they dressed it in smiles, because manipulation always starts with manners. That's when it happened. The subtle shift in the air, the moment the performance slipped. I sat straighter, calm, my face unreadable, because I knew something they didn't. I hadn't come to negotiate, I had come to watch them reveal their leverage, their motives, their desperation. If you've ever sat at a table where love felt like a business transaction, you know this feeling. They didn't ease into it. They didn't even pretend this was a discussion. Victor cleared his throat again, the second time tonight, and adjusted his glasses like he was testifying before a judge. As you know, the family motel group has been weathering some challenges. He began, choosing each word with surgical caution. Challenges. Not failures. Not incompetence. Challenges, external, unforeseeable, not their fault. My father jumped in before Victor could elaborate, eager to reframe the narrative with his usual salesman bravado. We've been planning a full transformation, he said, leaning back like a king unveiling a kingdom. Spa facilities, upgraded suites, an event space, weddings, conferences, retreats. A real destination. I've seen those motels. Brown carpets, buzzing lights, broken ice machines, rooms still dressed in the 1990s. A collection of buildings held together with duct tape and nostalgia. But in Gregory's mind, they were on the verge of becoming a luxury empire. Marcus took his cue like he'd rehearsed it. This is legacy-defining, he said, swirling his wine again. Bigger than the digital thing you're doing. Hotels are physical assets. Tangible. Real. Digital thing. The company currently valued at $28 million. The company that had drawn investors from 3 countries. Legacy, apparently, was only legitimate if it came with walls. My mother reached across the table, fingertips brushing mine like she was delivering a blessing instead of a bill. We carried you for so long, she said, voice trembling just enough to register on an emotional frequency. It feels right now that you're doing so well to give back. To be part of the family's future. There it was, guilt repackaged as destiny. Debt disguised as duty. Victor folded his hands. We're seeking a short-term bridge, just enough to get the renovations started so we can secure construction financing. My father jumped in, sealing the trap. $1.5 million. Ideally in liquid funds. The sooner we start, the sooner we scale. There was no hesitation, no soft landing. Just a straight ask for 7 figures from a daughter they had dismissed last week, last month, last decade, he continued, pitch sliding effortlessly into coercion. With your creditworthiness attached, we'd have access to financing at premier rates. You'd meet real players, developers, investors, politicians. People who can elevate your platform. Status as a reward. As though I'd been craving entry into a world that couldn't even keep occupancy above 50%. Victor nodded, eager to reinforce the illusion of structure. And of course you'd be repaid, with interest, once construction financing hits. 90 days, maybe 120. Promises printed on wishful thinking. I didn't speak. I watched. Gregory dabbed at the sweat forming along his hairline. Uncharacteristic, considering he'd spent his life performing confidence. Victor tapped his pen against his notepad, the rhythm betraying his nerves. Marcus kept smiling, bright, wide, aggressively optimistic, like enthusiasm could disguise bankruptcy. Even Dylan, who had said nothing of substance all evening, nodded vigorously, as though moral support could be monetized. They thought their desperation was invisible. They thought their performance was airtight. But behind the posture, the polish, the practiced lines, I saw panic. The kind that comes from believing your universe is collapsing and salvation just walked through the door wearing boots and a humble jacket. I remembered all the times I had been desperate, hungry, sleepless, terrified, begging spreadsheets to open and engines to start. And I remembered how no one at this table had ever offered to bridge anything for me. There was a time I would have folded. Out of fear, out of loneliness, out of warped loyalty. But I wasn't starving anymore. I wasn't sleeping in my car. I didn't need their approval to survive. And suddenly, the balance of power was unmistakable. They thought they had me cornered. But really, they just revealed everything I needed to know. I leaned back silent, letting them believe I was processing their generosity. Because the truth was, I wasn't negotiating money. I was calculating character. And they'd just given me the full ledger. Comment below if you've ever been the family item, the one they only call when they need something. I placed my napkin on the table and said the words I'd been rehearsing my whole life without knowing it. I folded the linen napkin slowly, smoothing the edges with deliberate care before setting it down beside my plate. It was a small gesture but final, like closing a book, ending a performance. Their voices stilled mid-expectation, waiting for gratitude, fear, or obedience. Instead, I looked at each of them and said very calmly, "You skipped the biggest moment of my life. But you're here for this." Silence dropped over the table. Thick, metallic, pressing like heat. No one exhaled. No one blinked. The candles flickered in the sudden vacuum of polite pretense, and my father was the first to recover, leaning back with forced patience. "Don't be dramatic," he snapped. "This is about family." I held his gaze, steady and unshaken. "No," I said, my voice quiet, sharpened on truth. "This is about money. And I didn't come here to rescue an empire you already burned down." My mother gasped, a soft, practiced sound, equal parts shock and performance. Victor stiffened, spine straightening like he'd been insulted in court. Marcus's smile cracked, the veneer breaking just enough for resentment to slip through. My father's face flushed, a slow, rising red fueled by entitlement and wounded authority. "You're going to lecture us about sacrifice," he snarled. "You have no idea what we've put into this family." "What family?" "Yes. The one that forgets I exist until there's a crisis." Marcus slammed his wine glass a little too hard, liquid trembling at the rim. "Gets a little attention online and suddenly thinks she's above the family," he muttered. There it was, resentment dressed as commentary. "Not because I succeeded, but because I wasn't dependent anymore." Mother pressed fingers to her temple, shaking her head with martyr's exhaustion. "We're trying to include you, Rose. We're trying to make you part of something bigger." I laughed, once quietly. "You didn't include me. You recruited me. Big difference." Victor finally spoke, smoothing his tie, tone full of condescending calm. "Look, $1.5 million is pocket change at your valuation. We aren't asking you to sacrifice anything substantial." Pocket change. 7 figures. From a woman who once slept in her car because she couldn't afford rent and workspace at the same time. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, mirroring my father's earlier stance, though mine wasn't a performance. It was a boundary. You all ignored me when I struggled. You minimized me when I succeeded. And now that you're drowning, you expect me to save you because we share DNA. My father's voice shook, not with fear but fury. We built a life. We built a business. We built something real. And you? I built alone, I cut in calm again. And you didn't show up when it counted. Another silence fell, longer, heavier, exposing all the rot beneath the silverware. For so long, I'd been afraid of their disappointment. Afraid of being labeled selfish, ungrateful, cold. But clarity is addictive. And once you feel it, you stop apologizing for taking up space. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about ending a cycle I had been conditioned to repeat. Debt, obligation, emotional blackmail disguised as loyalty. So I sat there, heart steady, voice certain, and did the most radical thing I had ever done in that family. I said no. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to family is simply no. They stared at me like I had just broken some unspoken law, like daughters were meant to comply, not confront. But once you stop performing, you start asking questions no one wants to answer. I leaned back, voice cool and precise. Tell me something. When you rejected my rental lease 6 years ago, what was the official reason again? Victor blinked, slow and cautious. I was trying to guide you, he said, choosing his tone like he was choosing a verdict. No, I corrected gently. You were trying to keep me in the box. The box where you felt safe. The one where I stayed small and dependent. Gregory scoffed, as if boredom could disguise embarrassment. We came to build something lasting, something real, not chase every trend that popped up on a screen. I tilted my head. Is that what we're calling it now? Building something lasting? Marcus rolled his eyes, but he didn't speak. Not now. Not with the tension tightening in the room like a rope being pulled from both ends. Okay, I continued, tone soft, but only because softness cuts deeper. Let's talk about what's lasting. I started listing facts, not opinions, not insults, facts. The leaking roofs you haven't fixed in 3 years. Victor's jaw twitched. The broken heating systems in 2 locations, documented in winter safety reports. Gregory's shoulders stiffened. The maintenance staff you haven't paid in 6 months. Marcus's wine glass stopped mid-air. And the outstanding loan payments that triggered the lien against the Oak Ridge property. Silence broke, not loud but sharp. A soundless fracture tearing through their composure. Faces went pale. Hands froze. Breath stalled. Dylan looked up from his phone, clueless panic settling in. Rose, what are you saying? I met his eyes, not unkindly. I'm saying you're not looking for an investor. You're looking for a lifeline. Victor's composure slipped for the first time all night, eyes glinting with something between fear and fury. That's an outrageous insinuation. I smiled, slow, measured, surgical. Is it? I reached for my bag, setting it on the chair beside me. Every eye followed the movement. I unzipped it, pulled out a simple, unmarked folder. No logo, no branding. Just weight. I placed it on the center of the table gently, like evidence being logged. I came tonight to hear what story you were going to tell, I said. I wanted to see if you'd present me with truth or theater. I tapped the folder with one finger, light and rhythmic. You didn't disappoint. Victor leaned forward, voice low, dangerous. And what exactly is in that? I held his gaze. Maintenance reports, debt schedules, contractor complaints, and the email from your lender denying your extension request last month. Marcus swallowed audibly. My mother's hand flew to her throat. Gregory looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under his kingdom. They thought I'd come here blind, hungry for approval, but they'd forgotten something fundamental. I'd built a company by knowing what people don't say, by recognizing desperation disguised as confidence, and plans disguised as panic. I didn't walk into this dinner unprepared. I walked in with reconnaissance. They thought they were interviewing me for a loan. I was gathering evidence. I sat back, letting the weight of the truth settle over them. "I didn't show up to be manipulated," I said. "I showed up with the one thing you never expected." I nodded toward the folder, toward their collapse, documented. "The truth. Watch what happens when the quiet one has been paying attention all along." The door to the private dining room opened without a knock, just a clean, silent swing like someone who already owned the space. Ava stepped inside with precision and purpose. Pressed suit, hair sleek, a stack of documents balanced in her arms like surgical instruments. Victor's face twitched. He didn't know who she was, but he already hated that she didn't look deferential. Ava nodded to Rose. "Everything has been finalized. The transfer is complete." The sentence landed like a gunshot muffled beneath velvet. Father shot to his feet so fast his chair screeched across marble. Transfer. Transfer of what? I didn't rush. I didn't stand. I simply slid the first stack of documents across the linen tablecloth. "Your motel group. Your debt. Your property obligations." I tapped the folder. "All of it." For a second, everyone froze because they didn't understand. People who have never lived without power don't recognize the moment they've lost it. Victor finally found his voice. "The bank hasn't." Ava cut him cleanly. "The bank sold the debt last week. To a private investment entity." Gregory leaned forward, eyes narrowing, tone sharp enough to cut glass. "What entity?" I didn't blink. "Mine." The room didn't explode with sound. It imploded with silence. A dense, suffocating collapse where air disappeared and gravity doubled. Father's mouth opened and closed, a fish trying to breathe on dry land. Marcus just shook his head slowly, like he could deny the reality by refusing eye contact with it. Dylan whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse, but his voice was too soft to matter. Mother's voice cracked on the cusp of hysteria. "Rose, what have you done?" I met her eyes, unflinching. "What you forced me to." Victor reached for the documents with shaking hands. He skimmed page after page, and with each turn his skin drained another shade. Overdue maintenance invoices, contractor complaints, compliance violations with dates and photos, freeze notices, shutdown warnings. The motel group wasn't just failing. It was hemorrhaging. He didn't look up when he whispered, "This can't be right." His voice wasn't angry anymore. It wasn't powerful. It was frightened. "It is," I said quietly. "Just not salvageable by you." Gregory finally snapped out of the trance. "You bought our debt. You're leveraging it against us. You're blackmailing your family." "No," I said, voice steady, almost gentle. "I'm taking responsibility for what you ran into the ground and expected me to fix." Marcus's chair scraped back as he stood, palms flat on the table. "You can't just walk in here and take what generations built." I met his anger with stillness. "It stopped being yours when you stopped paying for it." Mother looked at me with wet eyes. Betrayal, disbelief, entitlement all braided together. "Rose, baby, we were planning to rebuild." Leaned back. "You were planning to use me as the rebuild." No one argued that. No one could. Ava slid the remaining documents to me. "Signatures are complete. Filings submitted. You are the controlling entity effective tonight." I didn't savor it. I didn't smirk. But when I looked around the table, at the faces of the people who had never shown up unless there was something to take, I felt something quiet settle in my chest. Something solid, something earned ownership. The room didn't explode with sound. It imploded with silence. That's when my father realized. I didn't come for their approval. I came with the deed. Moneybag drop a moneybag. If you've ever dreamed of this level of karmic justice, Gregory was the first to erupt, voice booming through the room like a bad storm looking for something to break. "You think you can humiliate me? You think this little stunt makes you powerful?" I didn't flinch. "I'm not playing anything, Gregory. I'm cleaning up what you broke." Marcus shoved back from the table, face red, fists clenched. "You blindsided us. You should have told us." I met his rage with calm. "You didn't tell me anything when you rejected my lease application. When you called my work a hobby. Why would I give you the courtesy you never offered me? Mother's tears came next. Loud, wet, performative. This is our life, Rose. Home. Our legacy. And it will continue, I said softly. But not under your management. Ava slid a crisp envelope across the table. This is a formal buyout offer. $200,000. Payable upon transition. Gregory barked a bitter laugh. I'm not taking your pity money. It's not pity, I replied. It's severance. That word hit harder than anything in the envelope. Full stop. A closing door. Father had been silent until then. Face dark, jaw grinding. When he finally spoke, it wasn't loud. It was surgical. You are no daughter of mine. The words should have gutted me. 4 years they would have. But now, they landed like a key turning in a lock. Not a wound. A release. I stood, folding my napkin with deliberate care, placing it beside my untouched plate. You're right, I said evenly. I'm not the daughter you wanted. I looked each of them in the eye. Every face that had taken, dismissed, underestimated. I'm the daughter you made. Shock flickered across their expressions, not because they understood, but because they didn't know how to fight someone who wasn't afraid anymore. I lifted my bag, calm, unhurried. I didn't come here to save your empire. I stepped back from the table, lightness filling the space where fear used to sit. I came to end my part in it. I left them with their anger, their debt, their collapsing legacy, because none of it belonged to me anymore. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from them. I was walking toward myself. For the first time in my life, those words didn't land like a wound. They landed like release. Unlocked. If someone's rejection ever set you free, you understand this moment. So I pulled onto the main road. The city stretched ahead. For the first time, the future didn't look intimidating. It looked open. The night air hit me like a reset button. Cool, sharp, and utterly liberating. Behind me, the muffled chaos of my family's disbelief and shouts continued, but it no longer held any weight. I could hear them if I wanted, but I didn't. Ava fell into step beside me, heels clicking against the marble floor. You sure you're okay? She asked gently, concern threading her voice. I smiled, the first genuine smile in hours. I'm more than okay, I said. I finally stopped hoping they'd become people they never were. The old sedan sat in its usual corner, humble and reliable. Tonight I didn't need it. Tonight I took my SUV, the one I'd kept polished and ready, a reflection of my own hard-earned success, not a tool to make anyone comfortable. You don't have to hide anymore, Ava said softly, letting the word sink in. I felt it then, something heavy lifting off my shoulders. Expectation, guilt, habit, the invisible chains of being the family's silent fixer, their ATM, their emotional safety net. Gone. We drove in silence. No demands, no bargaining, no whispered threats. Just the smooth hum of tires on pavement and the city stretching its lights like invitations. And then my phone buzzed. Mother. I didn't hesitate. A single swipe, a single block, and the call vanished. No guilt, no second guessing. Just clean closure. The city grew brighter as we approached it. Lights spilling across glass towers, neon signs flickering to life, traffic humming with possibility. It didn't intimidate me. It welcomed me. Open streets, open opportunities, open life. That I realized something profound as we drove. They had always told me family was forever. But sometimes forever is just the length of time you allow people to hurt you. And love? Love isn't measured by blood. It's measured by how people show up when it counts. By presence. By respect. By care. I exhaled, feeling the tension leave my chest. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I was free. I glanced at Ava, who smiled knowingly. This is the start, she said. Yes, I said, voice steady, heart lighter than it had been in decades. This is the start. Not just of a life, but of choosing myself every single day. And in that moment I knew, you're not selfish for prioritizing yourself. You're not weak for walking away from toxicity. You're alive. You're powerful. You're surviving. If this story hit something in you, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose yourself over people who kept taking from you, know this: you're not selfish. You're surviving. Drop a comment with your story. You're not alone.